Hello, entrepreneurs, and welcome to the first course video. I'm Cira Cardaci, so let's begin our lecture discussion on best practices for customer discovery, so you can start conducting customer discovery interviews as early as right after watching this video. So why are we here? What's the purpose of this course? We're here to listen to our customers and literally discover who they are and what they care about so that we can form a viable business model to be able to serve them appropriately. Okay, so here's an agenda of what I'm going to go over in this video. We'll discuss why do customer discovery, who to interview and how to actually find them, how to conduct the customer discovery interview, what kinds of questions to ask during the interview, and then what happens after the interview, how to pull relevant information from the meetings you're having. I'm also going to include some tips and tricks that I've picked up from doing my own customer discovery, as well as list 3 rules for doing customer discovery. So let's start with why. Why do customer discovery? Customer discovery is the first step in the customer development process, while startups are still searching before they can execute on a business model. And you all recently just presented your first business model canvases, which are going to change. And if you couldn't already tell, we're actually going to push you to change it, because right now, everything on your canvas is a guess, a hypothesis, or an assumption that you have about what makes your idea a business. And more than half of those assumptions are going to change. But that's a good thing, because that means you're getting enough data to make a change. And it's also happening here in a safe and controlled environment with a teaching team who is willing to help you workshop everything that you're putting on your canvas. And it's not happening while you're out there selling to real customers and have built an entire company infrastructure around a business model that isn't proven yet. So I mentioned earlier that you're making changes based on data. And that's because what we're doing is applying the scientific method to business model generation. Customer discovery is actually just a series of experiments. You'll start with an observation, which you likely had before coming into this course, then form a hypothesis, test it, establish a theory based on patterns that you're seeing in the experiment. And all of this is happening while accounting for and adjusting for hypothesis updates, or what we call pivots. Throughout this course, we're going to push you to truly understand the problem, rather than focus on your specific solution or your specific idea. So it's not your job to validate the product, but it is your job as an entrepreneur to validate that a real problem exists, as well as to uncover gaps in the market that you can address with your proposed solution. It's possible that what you think is the problem is not actually a concern for that particular customer segment, or that an entirely different problem exists that you can still solve. So be prepared and get excited to hear the things that you didn't expect to hear, and make sure you're following the feedback honestly. And the only way to follow the data correctly is to have a large enough sample size to be able to recognize significant patterns. In this course, we're aiming for 20+ interviews, but really the magic number that you'll hear Steve Blank talk about is 100+ interviews. And if you pivot, that number will probably look a little bit larger. For consumer-facing companies, that number is probably closer to around 300+. But for this course, we're aiming for 20+. And the first 20 to 30 interviews is when you'll really learn the process first and get your initial insights that'll kickstart your customer discovery efforts. So all of the guesses that you have on your business model canvases are hypotheses that you can validate or invalidate after talking to potential customers. And you'll be able to designate whether the hypothesis is validated or invalidated on in your ecosystem, so you can track it as you go through each of your interviews. To be able to turn those guesses into facts, you have to create a valid hypothesis that can either pass or fail tests, meaning they have to be falsifiable. Each hypothesis has to be falsifiable. So which of these two assumptions do you think is a strong hypothesis to test? Our product will spread through word of mouth, or battery can boost energy storage by 23%. The second one here is correct because it's falsifiable. It's also quantified, which always makes for a really strong hypothesis. A good or a strong hypothesis adheres to what we call the QRST law. And QRST stands for quantifiable, relevant, specific, and testable. So knowing the QRST model, let's take a second and do a little exercise. While you're watching this video, grab a piece of paper and a pen, or use the Notes app on your computer or phone, just something to write with, and jot down what you think your riskiest assumptions about your business model are. And what I mean by that is that if any of these things are proven wrong, it would cause your business to fail. If you need to pause the video to take some time to do that, please do so. But this is a list that you can save and look at when you prepare your questions for interviews. Think of how you can turn each of those assumptions into questions to ask customers. Don't be afraid to test the hard things first. Okay, now on to who should we interview? And the answer is customers, right? A customer is anyone who could be involved in the adoption decision for your solution. And this might sound obvious, but buildings and companies are not customers. I say this because many times entrepreneurs list corporations, departments, municipalities as their customers, but really we're looking for who inside those buildings care about your solution and who can we pick up the phone to talk to. When interviewing potential customers, talk to people you don't know. That's going to be our first rule of customer discovery. Because warm contacts are usually biased, and that's going to skew your data. You want people who don't know you and who can give you realistic feedback so that you can make the appropriate changes. People who know you will most likely try to help you by telling you what you want to hear. And you want that honest feedback to be able to capture good enough data to make quick and accurate adjustments to your business model. This way you don't end up with a product that nobody wants. So then how do we find these customers to interview? Because you're not interviewing people you know, ask your contacts for contacts. Scour LinkedIn, social media. Cold call, cold email. Look for events that you think your customers might attend, such as virtual conferences. You can then email or message speakers and attendees before, during, or after those events to set up a time to speak outside of the event. Most professionals are already accustomed to setting up video chats, so asking for something like 10 to 15 minutes of their time should be okay. But consider the places where your customers hang out. How could you reach them? How are they accustomed to meeting already? If you're a consumer company wanting to talk to end users, maybe conferences isn't the right fit, but Facebook groups are. And you can go into Facebook groups and post that you're looking to talk to people. If you do end up making contact, whether you interview the person or not, make sure to always ask for a referral. This way you can turn that one interview into many interviews. So pro tip, target middle management. They usually have a wide range of understanding of the company's operations and will be able to connect you to a lot of others in the corporation. Also, start with Michael Scott, regional manager, before you get to David Wallace, CFO. Also, in my experience, assistants and office managers are very helpful, both for getting insights and for getting referrals or phone transfers to the right people throughout the office. When setting up interviews or requesting to interview someone, make sure you introduce yourself, say who you are, be brief, but also transparent. You can lead into the fact that you're doing research in a particular area and you need their help. If you're a student or researcher, use those titles. If not, you're still someone doing research as a part of this course, which you could also mention. But if the person that you're requesting to talk to thinks that you're trying to sell them something, which you definitely should not be doing in interviews, they'll likely ignore the email. I know I don't like to talk to people who are trying to sell me something. So don't come off like you're selling, because you're just doing research, trying to find out about their needs. In fact, don't talk about your tech at all in the interview. And if it somehow comes up, ask if you can talk about it at the end. But remember that flattery goes a long way. So make sure you research the person and be prepared to know who you're talking to. Also, be proactive about sending calendar invites. This way they'll be able to accept the invite and they'll have it on their calendar. If you don't have something like Zoom, Skype, or Google Hangouts, create an account and send them a calendar invite. Lastly, remember, there is always someone to interview. Consider different time zones that might be at play. And if you are working with different time zones, make sure you plan accordingly so that you don't miss an opportunity to interview. Okay, now for the good stuff, how to actually conduct the interview. And I say interview, but it doesn't really have to be a robotic question and answer type of sit down, but it should flow like a normal conversation. This way the person feels comfortable to answer honestly. Although you should have a set of hypotheses to test, and you may want to prepare questions around those hypotheses before going into the interview. Your goal should be to identify the biggest issue relevant to your solution. Identify how big of a problem it is. Where does it rank on their priority list? How urgent is the need? And then lastly, try to identify the improvement hurdle, or how good does your solution have to be for them to consider a change? Is this a minor inconvenience, or is it a problem that they need a solution for and they need it now? But beware that social, emotional, and contextual factors don't always show up in the data. People don't always do what they say they do or what they think they do. So make sure you're searching for behavioral data rather than attitudinal data. A person who shops at the same place regularly is behaviorally loyal, while a person who tells others how great the store is attitudinally loyal. So just adjust your questions to anticipate that type of feedback and try to ask specific examples of, let's say, the last time they visited the store and how that went. Really, you want to get to who cares the most, how big is the problem, and how big is the market opportunity to innovate within. Tip number 2 is that virtual and in-person meetings are always better than phone calls. This way you can capture and visualize the pain point in real time. In-person interviews are not required for this course, but if you would like to and are comfortable doing so, you may conduct in-person interviews, but please be safe doing so. Avoid email interviews, surveys, and focus groups, and try not to go for your dream interview first or the top C-suite person first. Start small. If you would like to record the interview, ask first, but also keep in mind that some people might not open up as much if they know they're being recorded. And then take some time after the interview to review your notes and reflect on some of the big insights. Okay. Here are some tips for effective interviewing. First, beware of confirmation bias by avoiding leading questions. Ask subjects to tell a story about the issue occurring in their life. Get to know their priorities. What else do they have going on? What's a day in their life look like? Also, follow your nose. If you think something has potential to be a pain point, ask them to go deeper. Ask them to go back to what they previously mentioned and give more detail. But really, you should be listening more than you're talking. They should be talking for the majority of the time. And the best question you could ask is why, followed up by another 3 whys, because getting to motivations is key. And that's what's really going to help you to understand your customer. Lesson number 3 is don't sell. I think I already mentioned this, but for any interview during which you talk about your technology or your idea, it's actually considered null and it doesn't count as real data. It's going to make the interview less about them and more about you, which leaves you less time to listen to their issues and their needs. Additionally, the idea that you have now will likely look different than the one that you launch your company with. So talking specifics about your idea now really wouldn't make much sense at this point in the process. Remember, we're looking for problems we can solve. You might go into the interview or start your customer discovery process thinking that your customer needs a shiny, complicated solution, but really they're just looking for a simple fix to a problem that they're having. You still don't understand the problem. So don't sell, don't show a demo, don't do a technical presentation, or talk about proprietary information of any kind. The interview is about them, they're the experts, and you're there to learn from their experience. But speaking of not giving proprietary information, you also should not be signing an NDA or asking subjects to sign an NDA. There's no reason for one if you don't talk about your tech. But if subjects would like to remain anonymous in your interview reporting, just tell them that you're not going to record their name, and you can list them as Dr. X or Engineer Y when you're recording your interviews on IYE and even in your presentations. Archetype and role are more important than reporting their names.